Texas, 1944. The sun had barely climbed over the horizon when the trucks rolled through the dust outside Amarillo. The engines coughed, sputtered and died, leaving only the sound of seekers and a low wind pushing through mesquite trees. Inside one of the trucks sat a group of German prisoners, not soldiers but women. Their khaki uniforms were creased, their eyes hollow from weeks of transport across oceans and borders. Among them, 24-year-old Lisa Lotto Minhardt, a former Luftwaffe radio operator captured near Cherbourg. She had imagined America as a cage of steel and fire. Every rumor from home had told her the same thing, that captured Germans would be beaten, humiliated, or made to dig their own graves under the desert sun. The truck doors creaked open. She braced for shouting, for the crack of a rifle butt, but instead came a calm voice, slow and strange in its rhythm. "Ma'am, watch your step." A man in a tan hat stood waiting, his sleeves rolled up, dust on his boots. He wasn't a guard in a uniform. He looked like the man she had seen in Western films before the war, a cowboy. Behind him, the Texas skies stretched so wide it seemed unreal, blue to the edge of the earth. Lezelot blinked in confusion. The air smelled of horses and hay, not gunpowder. Around her, other women climbed down hesitantly, clutching their small bags. There were no chains, no shouting, just a few soldiers leaning on rifles, watching without malice. The cowboy handed her a tin cup of water. It was cold, cleaner than anything she'd tasted since France. She drank it all at once. He nodded. Plenty more where that came from. She didn't know what to say. Back home, they had been told Americans were savages, a nation of criminals and factory slaves who live for money and machines. Yet here, standing in the soft heat of a Texas morning, she saw something that didn't fit the stories. Cattle moved lazily beyond the fences. Windmills turned in the distance. A dog barked, chasing shadows in the dust. The cowboy pointed toward the stables. "You folks will be helping out here, feeding, cleaning, riding if you're up for it." "Riding?" She almost laughed. She had expected shackles, not saddles. When the camp gates closed behind them, Lisa Lotta turned to look back at the open plains. For the first time since capture, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Curiosity, she whispered to herself, half in disbelief, half in wonder. This is America. The scene fades as the narrator cuts in. She had been taught to fear a monster. Instead, she found a nation so confident it didn't need to hate its enemies. A land where prisoners were given horses, not chains. Before she ever saw Texas, Lisa Lott had been certain she would die in America. Every German she knew believed it. The Reich's propaganda machine had made sure of that. Posters plastered across factory walls warned that captured soldiers would be tortured, starved, or used for experiments. Radio broadcasts described America as a land of corruption, a place where degenerate democracy had erased honor and replaced it with greed. For women like Lisa L., the fear was even sharper. Rumors spread through the Luftwaffe's auxiliary corps that female prisoners were sent to labor camps or used by enemy soldiers. The stories were whispered by officers and printed in pamphlets, each one reinforcing a picture of the United States as a cruel empire disguised by technology. That fear sat with her through the long journey west, through the cargo holds of Liberty ships, through the endless railways that cut across the plains. And yet, when the doors opened in Texas, the nightmare didn't come. The guards offered food. They said please and thank you. It was so unnatural. She wondered if it was part of some trick, but it wasn't a trick. The United States had something the Reich never truly understood: moral confidence. By 1944, America had become the world's largest warden of prisoners, holding over 400,000 captured Axis soldiers and civilians on its own soil. But instead of punishing them, the U.S. Army followed the Geneva Conventions with obsessive precision. Prisoners were paid small wages for labor, allowed to write letters, attend religious services, even learn English in camp schools. And in Texas, where land stretched farther than the eye could see, they were put to work on ranches and farms instead of behind barbed wire fences. The logic wasn't sentimental, it was practical. America had lost millions of young men to overseas service. Food still had to be grown, cattle had to be tended, cotton had to be harvested. German PS filled the gap, but to Lisa Lott and her fellow captives, This practicality looked like something else entirely: compassion. The first night she sat on her bunk, staring at a plate of food she didn't think she deserved. Beef stew, bread, butter, even a slice of apple pie. She couldn't eat. She thought it was a test. Another woman whispered that the food was poisoned. But by the next morning, hunger defeated fear. They ate, and they realized something profound. The enemy they'd been taught to despise fed them better than their own army ever had. In one of her first letters home, censored before delivery, Lisa Lau wrote, "They told us we would be slaves, but here even the guards say good morning. The sky is enormous, and the food tastes of mercy. For German women raised under dictatorship, the greatest shock was not material comfort, it was dignity. America didn't need to humiliate its captives to prove its power. That quiet, unshakable confidence would soon begin to dismantle everything they had believed about the war." By the spring of 1944, America had become the largest prison keeper in modern history. Across the country, more than 400,000 Axis prisoners, Germans, Italians, and Japanese were being processed, fed, and assigned to labor. Texas alone held more than 70 major camps scattered like islands across the plains from El Paso to Huntsville. Most were built in a matter of months, identical in layout and function. Rows of wooden barracks, mess halls, workshops, and parade grounds. But what made these camps remarkable wasn't the architecture. It was the philosophy behind them. Unlike the barbed wire brutality of Axis facilities in Europe or Asia, American P camps were designed not to crush morale, but to control it through order and decency. The logic was coldly efficient. A well-fed, busy prisoner caused fewer problems, required fewer guards, and perhaps most importantly, became a quiet ambassador of American superiority when the war ended. Each camp operated like a self-contained city. They had libraries stocked with donated English and German books, infirmaries with running water and clean linens, and workshops where prisoners repaired clothing and equipment. Even orchestras and theater troupes were organized to keep the prisoners occupied. To the outside world, this seemed absurdly generous. But to U.S. military planners, it was psychological warfare of the most subtle kind. When the U.S. War Department began receiving captured German women in 1944, mostly nurses, clerks, and auxiliary personnel from the Luftwaffe, they faced a logistical question no one had anticipated: where to put them. The solution was Texas. With its vast open spaces and agricultural needs, it became a natural location for experimental labor programs that could safely include women. Many of these women arrived through Camp Hearn or Camp Swift, sprawling installations surrounded by wheat fields and mesquite. There, the rules were simple. Obey, work, and you would be treated fairly. Any violation of discipline meant confinement, but for the most part, the camps operated on mutual trust. The work assignments soon became as varied as the Texas landscape itself. Some prisoners harvested cotton under the punishing sun. Others sorted produce in warehouses or milked dairy cattle. The women, however, were often assigned to ranch work where they cooked, mended, or tended livestock. For them, this was a world beyond comprehension. American soldiers trusting captured Germans with horses, tools, and freedom of movement. To American ranchers, it made sense. There were simply not enough hands left to run the war economy at home. To the German women, it was a revelation. The propaganda that had painted Americans as moral degenerates now collided with a reality of discipline, routine, and unexpected kindness. Even the meals were astonishing. Each prisoner received 3,200 calories a day, more than many American civilians. Bread, beef, potatoes, vegetables, and even coffee or fruit, when available to German PSWs used to ration cards and thin soup. It felt like abundance beyond reason. Everything about the American system ran on logistics, from the trains that delivered food to the trucks that collected laundry. The same industrial might that built tanks and bombers also fed its prisoners. And to Liselott Minhart, the lesson was unavoidable. Power wasn't just about armies, it was about organization. She wrote in her diary, "Every crate, every meal, every uniform fits into a plan. Nothing is wasted. They build everything like a machine that never sleeps." In time, she would see that machine up close on the ranches, where it merged with something even more bewildering to her: the easy, effortless generosity of ordinary Americans. The morning the trucks arrived, The air smelled of hay and dust. The Texas sun was still low, throwing long golden stripes across the horizon as the guards called the women's names from a clipboard. Liselotte Meinhardt stood quietly among 24 others, her posture straight, her uniform faded but neat. None of them knew what awaited beyond the gates, only that they had been selected for a work detail on a nearby cattle ranch. They had imagined the worst. Chains, fields of hard labor, endless hours under a whip or barking sergeant. For months, rumors had swirled through the barracks, stories of prisoners sent into the desert and never returning. But when the trucks rattled up to the camp gates, what they saw left them speechless. Instead of armed guards and barking dogs, there were men in wide-brimmed hats and denim shirts, leaning casually against pickup trucks. Cowboys, real ones. Their leader, a tall rancher named Frank Callahan, greeted them with a grin and a lazy wave. "Morning, ladies. You all ready to work?" His accent was so thick and cheerful that the interpreter had to repeat his words twice before anyone understood. When they arrived at the Callahan ranch, the shock only deepened. Instead of fences topped with barbed wire, there were open fields stretching to the horizon, dotted with herds of cattle and horses grazing under the vast sky. The first order of business, Frank announced, was not punishment, but breakfast. Bacon sizzling in iron skillets, biscuits, eggs and coffee, strong enough to jolt the soul. The women sat in stunned silence as they were served at a long wooden table. No guards stood behind them. No one shouted orders. After breakfast came another surprise. Frank led them to a corral where several horses waited, saddled and restless. "You'll be learning to ride," he said with a smile. "Can't herd cattle on foot, and y'all are going to help us drive them in next week." Laughter rippled nervously through the group. Liselotte whispered, "He's joking." But Frank wasn't. Within minutes, the ranch hands were pairing each woman with a horse, offering gentle instruction in broken German and pantomime. At first it was chaos. Skirts tangled, saddles slipped, and shrieks echoed through the corral as one frightened mare bolted, dragging its rider in circles. The cowboys laughed, not cruelly but warmly, helping each woman back into the saddle. "Don't fight her," one drawled. "Just feel the rhythm. She'll carry you if you trust her." By noon the women were covered in dust and sweat, but they were laughing. The fear that had gripped them for months began to melt. The Texas sun. For the first time since capture, they were outside the wire without guards at their backs. When Lisa finally learned to guide her horse at a gentle trot, she felt something she hadn't known since the war began. Freedom, not the political kind, but a personal one. A feeling of motion, wind, and possibility. That night, back in the bunkhouse built for workers, she wrote in her journal, "They trust us. It is madness, but also perhaps kindness disguised as madness. They treat us not as enemies, but as people. I do not understand this America." Her confusion was shared by everyone in the group. They had grown up in a society that measured strength in domination and obedience. Here strength looked like calm confidence, patience, and good humor. Even the cowboys' authority felt different. They commanded through example, not shouting. When a horse refused to move, they didn't whip it. They waited, spoke softly, and tried again. It was leadership built on respect, not fear. Liselotte watched this with quiet astonishment. If this was the nation they had fought against, then everything she had been taught about America was a lie. The transformation came quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Within days, the German women found themselves treated less like prisoners and more like ranch hands. Their only guards were the wide Texas skies, the rattling wind through the maquite trees, and the watchful eyes of the cowboys who treated them with a kind of rough courtesy. Instead of iron fences, there were boundaries of trust. Frank Callahan explained it plainly. "You run, you'll die thirsty out there. You stay, you'll eat well and sleep easy. We're not your jailers. We're your neighbors till this war is done." Liselotte didn't believe him at first. None of them did. But by the end of the first week, the truth became undeniable. The camp trucks came only once a week to deliver supplies, and no one counted heads. The women could have vanished into the plains at any time, but they didn't. Why would they? Here, under the endless sky, they were working, laughing, and even learning. They mended fences, milked cows, and learned to throw hay bales with the same precision they once applied to factory work back home. More than once the cowboys stood back and watched in quiet admiration. "Tougher than half the boys we've hired," one remarked. "And they don't complain neither." Lizelot noticed something else too. How differently the Americans seemed to value work. In Germany, labor was duty. Here it was pride. The cowboys joked, sang, and competed in small ways. Who could rope a calf fastest? Who could mend the longest stretch of fence before sundown? Evenings brought another culture shock. Instead of being locked away, the women were invited to sit by the fire, where harmonas and guitars turned the Texas dusk into something that felt almost sacred. At first they sat apart, weary and uncertain, but the sound of the music worked on them slowly, breaking down the invisible wall between victors and vanquished. One night, when a cowboy began to hum Lily Marlene, the song that every German soldier knew by heart, Liselott found herself singing along before she realized it. The fire crackled, voices blended, English and German, harmony and melody, until for a few fleeting minutes there were no enemies, only people bound by the same tune under the same stars. Afterward, Frank leaned back on his saddle and said softly, "War ends sooner when folks realize they were never that different." The next morning, the work resumed, but everything felt lighter. The barriers of fear and suspicion were fading fast. One of the women, Anna, asked if she could learn to use a lasso. The cowboys obliged, teaching her with patience and good humor. Before long, the sight of a German pea twirling a rope over her head drew laughter from both sides. But what truly cemented the change came one afternoon when a storm rolled in fast from the west. The sky turned black, the wind howled, and lightning split the horizon. The cattle panicked, scattering across the fields. Without hesitation, the women ran to help. They mounted horses, shouted, waved, and rode alongside the cowboys through sheets of rain and mud, helping drive terrified cattle back toward the pens. Hours later, drenched and shivering, they returned together victorious. Not one animal lost. Frank walked among them, his face stray with rain and pride. "Guess y'all ain't just city girls after all," he said with a grin. That night, the ranch hands quietly hung a hand-painted sign over the bunkhouse door, "The German Cowgirls." Liselott looked at it in disbelief, then laughed until tears came. Somewhere deep inside a shift had occurred. The war, the propaganda, the fear. It all seemed far away. What mattered now was survival, work, and the strange dignity of being trusted. In a world at war, that trust was rarer than gold. By early autumn, the air on the Texas plains began to cool, and so too did the walls around the German women's hearts. The war still raged across Europe, but here time seemed to move differently. Yeah, the days were filled with honest work, and the nights with quiet laughter and the hum of crickets. For the first time since capture, mail was allowed. Each woman received a single sheet of official camp stationery and was told she could write one letter home. The pages would be censored, of course, but even within limits, it was a rare chance to speak to the world they'd left behind. That night, the bunkhouse was silent, except for the scratch of pencils on paper. Liselott's hand trembled as she began, "Dearest mother, I am alive, and I must tell you something you will not believe. I am working on a farm in Texas. They call it a ranch. The people here are kind. Yes, truly kind. They give us food. So much food I can hardly eat at all. They even let us ride horses. The men wear hats as wide as dishes and drink something called Coca-Cola. They play music after work and teach us their songs." She paused, staring at the words. Would her mother think she had gone mad? The propaganda in Germany had painted American pea camps as brutal, inhumane places where prisoners were starved and beaten. But here, in this sunburned paradise, she was drinking coffee every morning and learning to make chili. She continued, "Mama, they trust us. We could run, but we do not. Because we are free in all the ways that matter. I never thought freedom could look like this." The letters were collected the next morning. Weeks later, replies came, carefully censored and trembling with disbelief. "Lisa, are you sure? You must be mistaken. Perhaps you are dreaming. They would never treat prisoners so well." Her mother wasn't the only one who doubted. Other women received similar replies. Their families refused to believe tales of hamburgers, open fields, and friendly cowboys. To those still enduring bombing raids and ration cards back home, such a life sounded like fantasy. Even the American officers who reviewed the letters seemed faintly amused. "Y'all are writing fairy tales," one chuckled. "Ain't nobody going to believe you over there." But the reality was undeniable. Each day, the German PS rode deeper into a version of America that defied everything they'd been taught. They saw it in the abundance. Eggs by the dozen, meat by the pound, sugar by the sack. They saw it in the machines. Tractors roaring across fields powered by gasoline that seemed endless. They saw it in the attitude. No hierarchy, no bowing, no fear. When Liselot asked one cowboy why he treated them so kindly, he shrugged. "Lady, war's over for you when you get here. Ain't no use fighting ghosts." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something more pragmatic, an American kind of mercy that measured worth by work, not by flag. One afternoon, a new group of PS arrived, male soldiers from another camp. They watched in disbelief as the women led horses from the barn, laughing and chatting freely with the cowboys. "This cannot be real," one muttered in German, but it was. For the newcomers, the sight of their female comrades riding across open pastures without chains shattered years of conditioning. It was the first proof that captivity under the Americans could be something other than humiliation. And as those men joined the work crews, they too began to soften. The cowboys taught them to mend fences, throw ropes, and eventually to dance. By November, the Callahan ranch had become something impossible. A small corner of reconciliation in a world still burning. For Liesel, it was the beginning of a quiet revelation that humanity could survive even in captivity, that kindness could grow from the ruins of war. She didn't yet know that these lessons would follow her home, reshaping everything she believed about the world. April 1945. The wind across the plains carried the scent of spring grass and rain. Calves had been born, fields were greening again, and rumors were swirling faster than the dust devils that chased each other across the pastures. Germany was collapsing, Berlin surrounded, Hitler dead. Some said, others whispered that it was propaganda. At the Callahan ranch, the German women worked as usual. They mended saddles, washed clothes, and herded cattle. But the tension in the air was unmistakable. The radio in Frank's kitchen, usually reserved for country music and baseball, now carried nothing but news from Europe. That afternoon, when Frank came out to the barn, his face was solemn. He held his hat in one hand, the other gripping a folded newspaper. "Ladies," he said quietly, "it's over." For a moment no one spoke. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap that hadn't yet broken. Over. "What do you mean?" Liselot asked in a whisper. "The war?" Frank said. Germany surrendered. Some women froze. Others dropped the tools they were holding. Anna covered her mouth and began to cry softly. Lisa Lata just stared at the ground. Her mind blank. For years, everything, every breath, every fear, every loss had been tied to the war. Now, suddenly, it was gone. No one cheered. There was no celebration, only stunned silence and the distant lowing of cattle. The women gathered that night by the fire, their faces lit by flickering orange light, unsure whether to feel relief or grief. Frank poured coffee for everyone and said quietly, "It's done now. You all can go home soon." The word home hit harder than any news of surrender. Home. What did that even mean anymore? Their towns might be gone, their families displaced or dead. Germany was rubble. Lisa sipped her coffee and watched the sparks drift up into the night. "What will we go back to?" she murmured. Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone knew there was no easy answer to that question. In the days that followed, the US Army sent officers to process the prisoners for repatriation. Trucks arrived to transport them back to official camps where they would await ships bound for Europe. The cowboys stood quietly by as the women packed their few belongings, mostly clothes, letters, and small keepsakes. Frank approached Lisa Latt as she was folding her work gloves into a small canvas bag. "Reckon you'll be going home soon?" he said softly. She nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan, for everything." He smiled, eyes squinting under the brim of his hat. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. You all worked hard, earned your keep. That's all any of us can do." Then, with a playful grin, he reached behind him and held out something wrapped in brown paper. "Got something for you." Inside was a brand new St. Son hat, cream-colored, soft as suede. "So you don't forget Texas," he said. Lisa Lott laughed through tears. She put it on awkwardly, the brim shading her eyes. The ranch hands whooped and clapped, and someone shouted, "Yah!" The German cowgirl rides again. When the trucks finally rolled out, the women looked back through the wooden slats and saw the ranch fading into the distance. The barns, the windmill, the men waving their hats in farewell. For Lisa L., that sight would never fade. It wasn't just a place, it was a revelation. She had come to Texas a prisoner and was leaving as something else. Someone who had glimpsed a different way of living, where dignity came not from rank or fear but from simple respect. As the truck rumbled down the dusty road, she whispered to herself, "Maybe we lost the war, but perhaps we can still win peace." In that moment, watching the wide horizon of America disappear behind her, Lisa Lott realized that the greatest freedom she had found wasn't physical. It was moral. She had seen the power of kindness, and it had changed her forever. The journey home took months. The war might have been over, but the ocean crossings were slow, and bureaucracy slower still. When the ship carrying Lisa Lott and her fellow prisoners finally reached Bremerhaven, Germany, it was winter again, cold, grey and broken. The docks were ruins. The city was flattened. What had once been streets were now rivers of rubble. As the women stepped ashore, their breath turned white in the frigid air. This was homecoming, but to a homeland that barely existed anymore. American officers handed them small care packages before they disembarked. Chocolate bars, canned food, and letters with instructions on where to go next. The sight of an American Red Cross logo on every box was both surreal and humbling. For years, they had been taught that Americans were monsters, materialistic, cruel, and without honor. But now, holding a Hershey bar and wearing a Texas cowboy hat, Lisa Lott felt the weight of that lie crumble completely. When she arrived in her hometown, what she found confirmed what she already knew in her heart. The war had devoured everything. Her house was gone, her parents dead, her village burned. But in the ashes of destruction, she carried something the ruins could not erase, an idea she had learned under Texas sun. She began working as a translator for the Allied occupation forces. Her English, learned from cowboys and ranch hands, was rough and full of slang, but it got her noticed. American officers often smiled when she called them partner or said ain't. She told them stories of Texas ranches, wide skies, and the kindness of the men who had treated prisoners not as enemies, but as human beings. It astonished many American soldiers to hear it. They had expected stories of hardship and cruelty, not tales of cattle drives, Coca-Cola, and cowboy hats. In 1948, Lisa L. was invited to speak at a post-war women's conference in Stuttgart. The topic, Rebuilding Through Understanding. She stood before an audience of German and Allied women, former enemies now seated side by side, and told them about her time in Texas. "I was a prisoner of war," she began softly, "but I never felt like one." She spoke of the cowboys who shared their food, of Frank Callahan's quiet dignity, of the day she first wore a sesson and felt perhaps for the first time equal. "I learned that freedom," she said, "is not given by nations. It is given by people, one act of kindness at a time." Her words moved the crowd to tears. When she finished, an American woman came forward and embraced her. It was the first time many in that hall had seen such a thing. A German and an American, once enemies, now sisters. Years later, Lisa Lott would immigrate to the United States. She settled in San Antonio, Texas, not far from where she had once worked as a P. She opened a small bakery that became known for its fusion of German pastries and southern flavors. Apple strudel with pecan crumble, pretzels dusted with smoked salt. Above the counter hung a framed photograph, a young woman in 1945 wearing a cowboy hat too big for her head, standing beside a tall rancher with a shy smile. Beneath it, a simple inscription read, "From enemies to friends." When people asked her about it, she would say, "That's the man who taught me what America really is." By the time Lisa Lau passed away in 1987, she had become a symbol of reconciliation in her community. Former PWs, both men and women, would visit her bakery, trading memories of war and the strange kindness they had found in the most unlikely of places. Historians now say that these P experiences played a quiet but vital role in shaping post-war relations between Germany and the United States. Thousands of former prisoners returned home with stories of fairness, decency, and compassion. They became the first human bridges in a world desperate to rebuild trust. In the end, it wasn't treaties or governments that began the healing. It was the simple decency of ordinary people. And on a Texas ranch in 1945, a cowboy with a gentle heart had done more to mend the wounds of war than any diplomat ever could. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't won on the battlefield. It's earned in the quiet grace of forgiveness.